First, I want to thank you for the work. It is exceptionally helpful and I think very fair. I'll just say for the record, I'm exceptionally, and I think most of us are, disappointed. We've actually worked and made a little here in the last few years on the deficit. And I voted with my friends on the other side on the fiscal cliff deal. That generated revenue. I know, Mr. Chairman, you did as well. The budget agreement that you negotiated with Senator Murray also restrained, discretionary spending. That made a little bit more progress in the right direction, and some mandatory spending as well. We're actually spending $164 billion less in the discretionary budget than we were spending in the last year of the Bush administration, fiscal year 2008. So that's actually real progress by Congress. And yet, when you look at this report, it really doesn't translate into long-term deficit reduction for the simple fact that we just simply haven't done enough on the entitlement front. Is that a fair statement?
I think the Congress hasn't done enough on entitlements and revenues in some combination. And again, it's not our place to say which side of the budget you should give more or less emphasis.
Fair enough. Between the two, which have we done more on revenue or entitlements?
Well, that depends on how you view the extension of the expiring tax provisions a few years ago. So under the current law assumptions we'd worked on, relative to that, the extension of most of the expiring income tax cuts in the early 2000s produced a big cut in revenues and a big increase in the deficit. I recognize that's not the way that many of you had thought about the sort of starting point in your own minds, but it makes it hard for me to answer that question, Congressman.
I know. That's why I want you to answer it. Are we going to have a lot more revenue than we would have had had we retained all of the Bush tax cuts?
You'll have more revenue than you would have had, exactly, because some of those tax cuts were allowed to expire.
Roughly how much more over a decade?
I would have guessed $1 trillion or so, but I'm not sure that we...
Okay. Well, ballpark. If you want to correct it later, that's fine.
I think my ballpark has been agreed to, Congressman, but
okay.
We don't know.
Well, let me ask you this. Have we $1 trillion worth of reforms in entitlement programs?
Well, the Affordable Care Act made substantial reductions in spending for Medicare, as you know. I have not tried to assess what that would look like over the same 10-year time period as is allowing some of those tax cuts to expire. So I think I should not speculate more about numbers I haven't looked up.
Well, let me come at it. I can look politically. It's obviously I think the revenue picture is easier to deal with, and the entitlement picture is easier to deal with. And I don't care which side of the aisle you're on. That's just the case of it. We saw the struggle with entitlement spending, frankly, in the budget agreement between Chairman Ryan and Chairman Murray. That's just politically a very charged area. Let me ask you this. Of the entitlement programs, which are the largest contributors to the deficit going forward over the next decade?
Well, the largest program, the single largest program, is Social Security. And the programs that are growing, whose increases are sharpest in dollar terms, are Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid.
And let me ask you this, and this is going to be a pox on both houses sort of thing. Has either party put forward a plan to deal with Social Security?
We have not analyzed any plans of that sort in the last few years.
I'd suggest that's because one hasn't been presented. We have not presented one on our side of the aisle, because it's politically pretty charged. Our friends in the administration hasn't presented one. It's probably statistically the easiest one to deal with because we actually know how many people turn the age. It's much more predictable, much easier, and yet neither party has had anything to say about it. Is that correct?
Well, we have provided Congress with a large menu of possible changes to Social Security and to other parts of the federal budget.
I'm not suggesting you haven't
not been asked to do a lot of estimates of specific pieces of legislation.
Actually, the tried to lead in this area was President Bush, who actually did put forward proposals and did do something. And so I just say this for the record for my friends, because we're going to have a lot of, this is an area where I think we really ought to sit down. This is where we ought to go down. Our friend, Mr. Delaney, on your side of the aisle, has an interesting bill to deal with this by commission and make Congress vote up or down the same way we do in BRAC. I would suspect it'll be full of unpalatable choices for both sides of the aisle. But that's something I would like to see us begin to look at and do. It's the most important single program that we have, the most popular. It's the one most Americans want us to ensure, and yet neither side of the aisle has put a plan on the table. Yield back.
Thank you, Ms.